Good evening. The United States has unleashed dozens of missiles on Syria in an act of vengeance for an evil gas attack on innocent civilians. In an address to the nation, Donald Trump says the bombardment was vital to stop the spread of deadly chemical weapons.
From under the cover of darkness, launched from warships in the Mediterranean, a barrage of missiles in a surprise attack. 6 years into the Syrian war, and America makes its first direct assault. The trigger, this week's chemical attacks.
Tonight I ordered a targeted military strike on the airfield in Syria from where the chemical attack was launched.
59 Tomahawks were fired at 3:45 a.m. local time from destroyers the USS Porter and USS Ross, targeting Syria's al-Sharat airbase, 120 kilometres from where those chemical attacks occurred. The chemical blitz killed at least 72 people and injured hundreds more, including children. Autopsies have confirmed a nerve agent was used, probably sarin. It left the victims in agony, paralysed, frothing at the mouth. President Trump was deeply shocked by the images.
No child of God should ever suffer such horror.
The world condemnation was near universal.
It's a serious matter. It requires a serious response.
And critically, it moved Mr. Trump to reverse a long-standing US position against involvement.
This is our breaking news, the first video of U.S. military strikes.
The president had hinted action was imminent yesterday on board Air Force One.
I think what happened in Syria is a disgrace to humanity. And he's there, and I guess he's running things, so something should happen.
The attack killed at least 4 Syrian soldiers, including a general, and took out a dozen hangars, a fuel depot and air defences.
It was a crime that called out for a swift response. And today, the United States has responded.
The Tomahawk cruise missiles, almost 3 metres long, fly low at 1,000 kilometres an hour, cost $750,000 each. They are the US weapon of choice to attack from safe distances. But there are grave implications now for Allied military in and over Syria, including Australia's F-18 Hornets. RAAF operations have not been suspended.
We've taken all of that into account in terms of our own force protection.
The question now, how will Syria's key backer Russia respond? Their relationship with the US now appears terminal.
This has got to be one of the last nails, if not the last nail, in the coffin.
The US and Russia endured decades of Cold War, everyone now praying a hot war isn't sparked.
Good night, and God bless America and the entire world. Thank you.
Chris Reason, 7 News.
Australia's Defence Minister received a phone call moments before the Tomahawk missiles were fired. So far, the United States hasn't asked for our help, but RAAF warplanes are deployed in the region.
Malcolm Turnbull leaves a Liberal Party federal executive meeting as news of the airstrikes breaks. Foreign Minister Julie Bishop working the phone.
The Australian government strongly supports the swift and just response of the United States.
A one-off attack, he said, sending a firm message to the Assad regime that its use of chemical weapons will not be tolerated.
It is a war crime, and it is a blatant contravention of basic principles of humanity.
You can't gas the citizens of your own country. That is a war crime, pure and simple.
Mr Turnbull offering his strong support for US President Donald Trump, although insisting
we are not at war with the Assad regime.
He says Russian President Vladimir Putin has a solemn obligation to now haul Syria's Bashar al-Assad into line and work towards peace.
I think that's now quite a possibility, is that the Russians will say, well, this was Assad's fault. He's now moving on, and they will come up with a friendly general or someone like that. Defence Minister Maurice Payne received the government's first warning of the impending airstrikes in an early morning phone call from US Secretary of Defence James Mattis.
Australian assets were not involved in this morning's operation.
Although force protection measures are being increased for our troops in the region. Malcolm Turnbull says he's had no immediate request for an increase in Australia's military involvement, although our future contribution is sure to be discussed when US Vice President Mike Pence visits Australia later this month. The Australian Air Task Group is conducting raids mostly around Raqqa in eastern Syria. It includes 7 FA-18 Hornet fighter jets, 1 KC-30 refueller and an E-7 Wedgetail early warning aircraft. As of the end of January, they'd flown 44 airstrike missions against Islamic State targets in Syria, with the prospect of many more as the brutal conflict drags on. Mark Riley, 7 News.
Good evening. For the first time as President, Donald Trump has flexed his muscles on the international stage by unleashing a barrage of cruise missiles against military targets in Syria. Australia has thrown its support behind the swift and angry response to the Assad regime's deadly gas attack. Laura Turner has the latest.
A surprise attack from the new Commander-in-Chief. Tomahawk missiles shooting into the sky from US Navy ships in the eastern Mediterranean Sea. Their mission to pound a Syrian airbase. It's a bold move from a new president, but he says this is a direct retaliation to Syrian dictator Bashar al-Assad's chemical weapons attack, which killed more than 70 civilians earlier this week.
Tonight I ordered a targeted military strike on the airfield in Syria from where the chemical attack was launched.
It's not the first time al-Assad has used chemical weapons on his own people, but Donald Trump had long said Syria was not his war to fight. Everything changed for Trump, though, when he saw these pictures, scores of children dying in the latest chemical weapons attack.
It was a slow and brutal death for so many. Even beautiful babies were cruelly murdered.
The missiles were launched from 2 destroyers in the eastern Mediterranean Sea, targeting Shariat Air Base in Homs province. The BGM-109 Tomahawks can fly below enemy air defences at speeds of up to 880 kilometres an hour. They can carry 450 kilograms of explosives and cost up to $2 million each. Trump launched 59 of them. It was certainly a risky move. There are Russian forces in Syria, and Vladimir Putin is a strong ally of Bashar al-Assad. On the surface, Trump's military action would appear to compromise his friendship with Russia, but the Pentagon has revealed they warned the Russians on the ground before the missile launch. The question remains as to whether the Russians then warned Bashar al-Assad, who's at the helm of the deadliest conflict of the 21st century so far. The civil war in Syria erupted in 2011 when the Assad government killed hundreds of peaceful protesters. With the country in turmoil, Islamic State invaded from neighbouring Iraq. A US coalition, including Australia, launched airstrikes targeting the terror group. America also backed some rebel groups fighting in Syria. But Russia caused outrage when it supported the Syrian government with airstrikes and intelligence. This US strike today is an attack on Assad and a loud message to Moscow. And Australia is right behind the US.
The Australian government strongly supports the swift and just response of the United States. This was a calibrated, proportionate and targeted response.
This is a defining moment for the Trump presidency.
We ask for God's wisdom as we face the challenge of our very troubled world.
In the United States, Laura Turner, 9 News.
And Laura joins me now. Laura, Donald Trump could feel the ramifications of this.
Good evening to you, Pete. That's right. Donald Trump has been applauded from many corners for this action, but he's also launched this strike without consulting the United Nations and without approval from US Congress. Syria has now commented as well, saying that 6 people were killed in this strike and called it an act of American aggression. Russia has said the same and also said that it was launched under a far-fetched pretext. The White House too has said that despite this military action, retaliation. It doesn't change US policy in Syria, but does prove that Donald Trump is willing to act if another government crosses the line. Despite those comments, there are very serious questions being raised here in the US tonight as to whether this is just the beginning of US military action in Syria. Pete?
Thank you, Laura.